Everyone I know remembers the day God returned. Some Christians told us that He would be returning as He was coming to forgive us of our sins, whilst the majority of the other religions told us He was coming to punish us for ruining Earth and causing so many animals and insects to fade into extinction. I'm sending this message from the future to warn you of the massacre to come, and although it goes against everything I believe, I feel like I should at least give a brief warning of the horrors that await you. If you're reading this message, the year should be 2019, but if it isn't, hopefully the year won't be far off where I wanted the message to go to. I was 17 in 2019, and I only have a vague memory of that year. On the other hand, I do remember all the television programs droning on about global warming and about all the plastic in the oceans and how we needed to act now before it's too late. Sadly, I have to tell you that in the future, things are worse than you can ever imagine. There's still plastic in the oceans. And where there was once an Amazon rainforest, there's now only a large stretch of barren land. I know what you're thinking. Why did we not take action sooner? Well, to be honest, you did try, but the task was too difficult. With all the buildup of waste in the oceans, you tried to turn completely to hydroelectric power, but because there was more plastic than water in the oceans, you swiftly changed back to nuclear power, and then came the terrible news from NASA. The sun was slowly but surely expanding due to an unknown force. The news hit everyone like a shockwave as it dawned on you that you didn't have long to live. That was the day God returned. All the television programs, all radio broadcasts abruptly cut off, and there was pure white noise for a few seconds. Then came a voice. It spoke to us all, translated into all languages. Even those who are deaf could hear it. The voice said, "I am God. I have returned." People started screaming. People started rioting. The voice continued, amplified across cities. "I have returned to warn you of the terrors that await you. I have returned after centuries of battling the foul creatures and omnipotent forces that want to take Earth for itself." The creatures had names, but I can't say the name, mainly because I can't pronounce it. I'll call them demons, for want of a better word. The voice returned and spoke to us many times after that, until it became part of our daily lives. The sky turned black, and there was heat wave after heat wave. Many people died before the massacre, killed by starvation and dehydration. For those who survived the drought and food shortage would have later wished that they had died from the effects of the heat wave. We panicked. We prayed. Some of us tried to escape to space and try to move to another planet, perhaps, but that idea quickly diminished as the stars started disappearing, one by one. This sparked true panic into the few skeptics who were left, and more turned to God and begged and prayed for forgiveness. God did not answer our prayers. God did not save us from our sins. It turns out, spending eons battling demons does something to a person. When God spoke to us for the last time, He told us, "I can do no more. I have no more strength. I will leave now and build a new earth, build a new species of human." We screamed, we begged, but there was nothing we could do. God had abandoned us. That was the day the demons broke through. I can't describe them in detail, as I haven't seen many, thankfully. But from what I've heard, they are a mix of many creatures. My sister said one of them had the head of a boar, but had the body of a deformed and bloodied humanoid. There are others too. but you cannot see them with the naked eye. They are the demons that possess people, like in the old horror films I watched from around your time. No one knows when they are possessed, but when you do, it's too late. You've already killed half of your friends and your family. I was one of the few hundred who survived the massacre. We built underground shelters, like in that war you had, I think World War II it was called. There are just 7 shelters left at the time I'm writing this. There is one in London, the one I'm in now, and the rest are in America, Australia, Italy, France, India, and Russia. The rest of the countries are completely destroyed. The population either possessed or engulfed by the demons. If you're in one of those countries that isn't on the list, I strongly suggest you move to one of the countries that is on the list. This shelter is no longer safe. I feel like the demons know where we are. The old man across from me is acting strangely, and we think he may be possessed. We don't know for sure, but in times like these, you can't afford to make mistakes. We held a meeting with the majority of us voted to kill him, just in case. There are no second chances. I'm running out of ink in this relic of an old typewriter. Whether you choose to believe this message is up to you. If you do or don't, it's your choice. But heed this warning. There isn't much you can do to stop the upcoming disaster. But if you prepare yourself just a little, you never know. I think you should start praying. Praying to God. Praying that He never returns. Oh God, they're here. I can hear them outside. They're coming for us. We're all holding our breaths. Please, please heed my warning. Don't pray for me. By the time this message reaches you, I'll probably be dead. Pray for yourselves. Pray they will spare you. Pray that I graduated from high school today, and as I look over my happy memories and stupid moments, I can't help but remember that awful afternoon. Yeah, it's like a stain on my mind that comes up whenever I try to remember anything about my high school memories. I hope that by writing it down here, I can come to terms with what had happened. The teacher's voice had subsided into the background as I stared at my workbook. Our math teacher wasn't that good. In fact, I'm surprised as to why they had signed him to our class, which was an Extension 1. It wasn't worth thinking about this though, because the bell was going to ring any second now. When it did ring, everyone started to pack up their things and file out of the classroom. I stayed behind for a minute and waited for my friend to pack up and then followed him. Both of us knew where we were going, down to the usual soccer courts to play our typical lunch game of soccer. Yeah, if that's what you would call it. In reality, it was more of a mixture of aggressive shoving, tackling, and largely offensive language. This being an obvious result to what happens when teenage boys are left with minimal teacher supervision. I hope it doesn't rain, Ethan, my friend, said as we walked past the canteen. Yeah, it's been raining all week, dude. It better not happen now. We were finally there and we plopped our bags down in a little shed where the rest of them were and walked into the fence off the soccer courts. Most of the kids were already there, a mix of older and younger grades all eager to kick a ball and shove someone. The teams formed naturally and before we knew it, we were all running at each other. The ball eluded some and landing at the feet of others, only to be launched back and forth between the goals with only a few of the actually skilled kids trying to dribble and pass. Even when the ball finally made its way close to one of the goals, there were so many kids on the court that it would be almost impossible to shoot without hitting someone. To be honest, I wasn't much of a soccer player. I would usually just run back and forth on the field, trying to get a go at the ball. Sometimes I'd get it, sometimes I'd push someone with the ball and take it from them only to pass it to the opposite team. Most of the time, I'd be occasionally staring at the large trees that surrounded the soccer court, leaving only one side to spare. Today, the weather was dodgy. It was cold and windy, and those big, almost black trees were swaying. The clouds up in the sky were dark, gray, and heavy. Despite it being barely past 1 in the afternoon, the level of light made it feel closer to the evening. Regardless of this, we were playing more passionately than ever before. Many of the regular players had decided not to come today as they had a test the next period, and some preferred to stay warm in the library. In the end, it had boiled down to about 20 of us, eager to play after a week of no play due to the rains. Our teams were much smaller and tight-knit, and the game was intense. 10 minutes in, the game was beginning to reach its peak. Goals had been scored on both ends, and we were all warmed up and aggressive. It was an unspoken sentiment amongst all of us that winning this game would be the ultimate trophy for the rest of this term. The circumstance and weather had turned into a very chill game of lunchtime soccer into one that was even more stressful than the Premier League finals. It began to rain, a light drizzle that started to darken our white dress shirts in little spots. Everyone ignored it, knowing that the game must go on. Then the rain began to fall harder, and the sheets of water like buckets began flipping upon us. All of us were drenched, our shirts clinging to our bodies and our gray trousers weighing us down. Then, in the intensity of the rain, the ball was rocketed towards one of our defenders. He kicked it hard, but at just the wrong angle, and the ball went flying up into the air, over the high chain-link fence and down somewhere into the trees. Almost immediately, everyone started yelling and complaining. The kid who had kicked the ball hung his face in shame and ran off to get it. We all stood around waiting and chattering amongst each other. The sudden pause in play had made us really realize how wet we were and how intense the game had gotten. Some suggested calling it for the day and going into shelter due to the rain, but most of us wanted to finish this. It had now been a few minutes since the kid had disappeared in between the dark trees. We were starting to get impatient. The rain relentlessly poured down on us. Drops of water were pouring off of everyone now. Our clothes, already too drenched to absorb any more water. The court was also getting worse with the puddles forming here and there. One of the kids started yelling out for him to come back. "Leon, where the hell are you?" No response from the trees. Just a steady drum of rain and a sway of branches in a wind. The kid that had initially called out began to walk towards the trees with a tinge of irritation in his step. Then, just before he was about to walk out of the courts, Leon appeared again. He looked horrible. His shirt was torn in various places and stained in patches of dirt. His hands were covered in small cuts and his hair looked like he'd been in a tornado. The most jarring was his lack of response, though. The way he solemnly walked with a ball in his hands, it seemed deflated. Everyone was walking over to him now with deep concern rising through all of us. People asked him if he was okay, how he had gotten into that sort of condition, but Leon refused to answer any of them. He let the ball drop to the floor before he himself collapsed. The atmosphere of the principal's office was tight. The silence a weighing burden on all of us that became more and more unbearable the longer it stretched on for. Usually, we'd just be yelled at for playing soccer in the rain and getting ourselves wet, but today it was different. Today we were being accused of doing something to Leon. Leon, who is now being sent to the hospital to be treated. Fortunately, though, we all had our stories straight. The principal was quick to realize that something had happened amongst those trees, and as soon as he realized that, she let us off. It was just like that. A whole serious investigation was closed immediately, and we were free to leave to our next classes with a warning that we don't speak of what happened to the others. It was inevitable that the rumors would spread, and when they did, I learned a lot more about those trees. Apparently, several students had come back out in similar horrible conditions after they had walked into those trees. There was this group of girls that had decided to spend a lunchtime there between the trees and one lunch. They were late to their classes by a full half hour, and when they came, they were supposedly in much worse condition than Leon. Another young boy was found sometime after school by a janitor just lying outside the trees looking like he'd been through hell. There was this other boy from our grade who had once lost his frisbee there, and as he was about to walk in to get it, he saw something there and jumped back. When his friends questioned him as to why he didn't want to go to retrieve the frisbee, he would not describe what he saw. At this point, and it's hard to separate the fake stories from the facts, but it was obvious that something was up with those trees. For a long time, many of us avoided playing soccer down at the courts. Even on warm sunny days when the birds were chirping and the sky was full of clouds, the trees remained dark and uninviting, almost daring us to traverse them. The natural avoidance and caution around the trees reduced the number of incidents almost to none. A month would pass, and winter would reach its peak. Cold, freezing winds now regularly blew across the school, and most of us either huddled in groups around various parts of the school to exchange conversations or hug out in the library, only to be kicked out for being nosy. Winter also meant the approach of the exams, and so the topic of the trees was almost off our minds. It was much like a ghostly afterimage now, a chapter in our lives that had ended. That is, until the first death happened. It was a teacher walking down past the trees after school that got to see the body, impaled on a thick tree branch, and as pale as the snow surrounding it. Beneath it, a bright red pool of blood staining the snow like a food dye in water. Police were sent to investigate, and we were let out of school for a week. The incident was largely covered up to save the school's fallen reputation, but that didn't stop the whispers in the hallways. Then one morning, as we all piled into school, we saw heavy machinery and construction crew near the trees. The school had decided that the best way to deal with the trees would be cut them down. At this point, no one really gave supernatural attributes to the trees, but we all assumed some group of students was using them to do sadistic things. But never once did we blame the very trees and the forest. When the bell for the first period rang, we all walked to our classrooms. Only this time, the irritating buzz of the machinery permeated the classroom and made it hard to focus. The teacher was talking about something when, right in between her lecture, the sky outside began to darken as the sound of the machinery died down. Everyone rushed to the windows before the teacher could ask us to sit down, and we all got an eyeful. Luckily, our classroom was positioned in good view of those trees, so we got to see exactly what was happening. The darkness was leaking from the trees where the blades of the machines had cut them. It was like an oil spill in the ocean, spreading into the sky and turning it an inky black darker than the night sky. Within a few moments, the sun began to drown in this vicious darkness, and that's when it went completely pitch black. People were starting to panic in the blindness with the school lockdown alarms ringing. Instructions to stay in the classrooms and remain calm blared across the speakers. I turned back from the window and pulled my phone out of my pocket to turn its flashlight on. Many others did the same, lighting up the room in ghastly white glows. Our faces were pale and overshadowed by panic. Then, when we looked back at the windows, some of the students were still staring out. "I see something," one of them said, and then all of them in unison. Then they began to scream, all on the same note in a chorus from hell as they turned back from the windows and jumped on top of the closest kid they could find. They clawed at their throats with bare hands, attacking them in utter madness. No lockdown instructions were going to keep the remaining of us inside the classroom with people literally murdering each other. We all ran into the hallways and were greeted by more kids running around as well. A crowd of bodies was beginning to form, pushing and shoving me around helplessly wherever the collective body was going. I saw a few kids fall and never get up again, and nearly fell a couple times myself as people shoved me from all directions. Shockwaves of shoving and pushing went around the crowd as everyone screamed and tried to run out of the building. And getting down the stairs was the worst, and I'm surprised I managed to stay on my feet as people shoved me from the top. The sky was beginning to lighten up again as the darkness seemed to dissipate into the sky. And then, just like it had started, the darkness faded away slowly. The police had already arrived at the scene, plus some men in black suits. Our school was quarantined for a week, but this time we were given serious NDAs to sign and paid off big sums to keep us silent. If you were to walk around our school today, it's unavoidable that you'd notice a group of trees down by our soccer courts. They are now white. I rented a beautiful home in the foothills of West Virginia. I needed some time away from the hustle and bustle. This place was amazing. It was like someone had plopped a beach house down in the middle of the woods. I didn't need a place this big for myself, but I couldn't pass up the amazing price for a weekly rental. When I asked the woman why this beautiful home was so cheap, she smiled nervously and said, "It's just that time of the year." I didn't question her any further for fear that she would realize her mistake and up the price. The day I arrived was mostly sunny with a few clouds lazily drifting by, just enough to give some ambience to the scenery. It was on a wildlife preserve, so animals lingered in the field without a care in the world. I saw a deer and a turkey walk right up to my car as I drove down the dirt road towards my destination. When I pulled in, I thought I had arrived in heaven. There was a lake right next to the house with fields and woods all around. A fire pit was set up beside the lake with a ring of wooden chairs encircling it. As I parked my car, I got my suitcase. A deer walked right up to me and sniffed me. I held up my hand and she, I assumed it was because she had no antlers, regarded me for a moment before sticking her nose in my palm and taking a deep breath. She eyed me once more, then slowly walked off as if she had said hello to a neighbor and was on her way. I typed in the security code and went inside. The pictures didn't do this house justice. My jaw dropped and I dragged it around looking at all the rooms. There was a full game room with a pool table, a card table, foosball, air hockey, a giant TV, you name it. This place had a hot tub and a half-dozen decks surrounding it. You could step out and see in any direction from a bird's eye view. There were rocking chairs all around, which I fully intended to take advantage of. The entire place was set up for comfort and ease. I put my suitcase in the master bedroom, then brought the rest of my supplies in, which consisted of a lot of food. I had no idea how far the stores were from the house, and I didn't want to waste hours of my day looking for a grocery store when I could be relaxing. Once I had put all my food away, I looked around for the Wi-Fi password. It was posted on a bulletin board in the kitchen, along with some other instructions. "This is our home. Please take care of it as you would your own. The dishes and silverware are here for your use. Please make sure they don't accidentally visit your house." I chuckled at these little reminders. Please don't flush anything but toilet paper. But then I paused as I read an unusual one. When you retire for the evening, make sure you close and lock all windows, doors, blinds, and curtains. Don't open them or go out onto the deck for any reason until sunup. If you wish to stargaze, do so only on Wednesday night. This struck me as rather odd. I had no intention of doing any of this, of course. Once I go to bed, I'm out till morning. I settled in and made myself some supper. I took it outside and sat in a rocking chair that overlooked the lake. I watched the sunset mirroring itself in the water before disappearing. Shortly after, the clouds lit up a brilliant red at twilight. I never wanted to leave this place. Once the post-dusk insects came in, I decided to adjourn back inside and read a book. I perused their selection, which ranged all over, from the standard paperbacks of John Grisham and Lee Child to cookbooks to history books. There were also a few more esoteric choices, such as Strange Creatures of the Wilderness and Haunted West Virginia. I decided on a Clive Cussler book and took it with me to bed. A few chapters in, I felt sleep tugging at my eyelids, so I laid the book aside and snuggled in. It seemed like 10 seconds later, the morning sun was peeking in through a sliver of the blinds, telling me that it was time to get up. I made some coffee and a bagel, then went back out to greet my lake. It had been raining, and that fresh smell lingered in the air. The feeling of renewal surrounded me. I wanted to stay here for the rest of my life. I milled around the house that day, taking some incredible wildlife pictures. I read some more of my book and pretty much enjoyed relaxing. When I went to bed that evening, I made sure the doors were locked and the blinds were closed, as instructed. The next day went pretty much the same. I decided to do some stargazing that evening, but it was overcast and the stars only peeked out here and there. I went to bed disappointed for the first time this week. The following night, I went to bed early with the intention of getting up in the middle of the night and looking for the missing stars from the night before. At midnight, the alarm on my phone woke me up. I peeked out through the curtain and saw a sky full of stars with nary a cloud in sight. Excited, I grabbed my camera and tripod, then headed out onto the deck. The air was crisp, but not cold. I got my camera set up on the tripod and started taking pictures of the stars. As the camera did its thing, my eyes drifted toward the lake. It was a moonless night, and there was little light, but as my eyes adjusted, I swore I saw someone sitting in one of the chairs near the lake. As I looked more intently, I saw more than one somebody. It appeared that each chair was occupied. I wondered if some local kids were borrowing my fire ring for a party, not realizing that I had rented the place for the week. My ire rose and I began to mentally compose the email I would send to the owner informing her of the intrusion when my mind froze. None of them were wearing clothes. I know when I see a naked person. Admittedly, that hasn't been nearly as often as I'd like lately, but I know the look. These people didn't look like that. They were tall, dark, and looked like every one of them needed a full body shave. And then it hit me. They weren't human. My curiosity and fear raged a mighty battle, but in the end, curiosity won. I slowly adjusted my camera from aiming at the sky to aiming at the chair surrounding the fire pit. I had just snapped the first picture when one of the creatures noticed me. It growled something to the rest of them, and they all turned and stared at me. I've never felt such a shard of pure terror penetrate my mind as I did that moment. I grabbed my camera and darted back inside. Once there, I made sure to lock the door. It wasn't 10 seconds until the assault began. The pounding on the doors and windows was nothing in comparison to the guttural growling and screaming. I was terrified beyond rational thought. I ran downstairs searching desperately for some place to hide. The pounding seemed to follow me as they had surrounded the house. I searched for a room to hide in that didn't have windows. In desperation, I threw myself into a closet and locked the door. There was no light, so I shined my phone around in the cramped closet and set on a box of cleaning chemicals. My breathing came in ragged gasps as panic and physical exertion conspired to send me into unconsciousness. The pounding seemed farther away. I was able to calm myself enough to slow my breathing. I looked at the camera, still mounted to the tripod. I turned on the camera and looked at the picture. It was blurry. My settings were still for taking pictures of stars. Any movement would blur the image. So much for proof. The pounding had ceased. I listened with hopeful ears to see if my siege of terror was over. That's when I heard the terrible sound. It wasn't a scream or pounding or anything like that. It was a creak of a floorboard. I stopped breathing and listened. It must have been my imagination. And then I heard the heavy breathing. I crept up to the door and listened. It was right outside the door. I started shaking. After 10 minutes, this creature hadn't ripped the door open and devoured me. I sat back down and tried to relax. If I was going to die, than I was. There was nothing I could do about the creature right outside my door that was obviously hunting me. I relaxed and slowed down my breathing. My adrenaline finally wore off and I crashed. I leaned my head against a shelf and waited for my inevitable death. I woke up sometime later. I slowly sat up and stretched my neck to work out the kinks. I looked at my phone. It said 3:33 a.m. It also said low battery. I had run out of options. I stuck my phone in my pocket. I picked up my camera with the tripod still attached and reached for the door. I turned the knob quietly as possible and inched open the door. I stifled a gasp when I saw what looked like a giant bear rug curled up in a ball on the floor. Its breathing was loud and steady. I pushed the door open as far as I could and tried to squeeze through. The door refused to open enough for me to fit. I looked down and saw the door was pressed against the creature's foot. There was nothing for it. I had to move the foot or stay in my closet prison. I pushed with all my might. The door opened another inch. I braced my back against the door frame and pushed again. The foot moved enough for me to escape. Then the creature stirred in its sleep. I froze halfway out the door. The creature began to move. It stirred and began moving its gargantuan arms, then its legs. Suddenly it kicked the door, throwing me back into the closet and slamming the door. I landed on my back and the wind was knocked out of me. I lay there, trying to regain my breath and assess the damage. I felt pain, but didn't think anything was broken. I slowly rose and approached the door. I opened it and peeked out. The creature was still laying there, breathing slowly, apparently asleep. Its foot had moved and the door was able to open. I stepped through, pointing my tripod at the creature as though it were some magical sword that would help me if it woke up. I sidestepped through the door, keeping my eyes on the mountain of fur laying in front of me, and back toward the front door. I glanced behind me just in time to see a second creature, wide awake, towering over me. It looked down, and a low growl escaped it. I made a smelly puddle on the floor. It sniffed and recoiled. I jumped at the chance and dove for the door. It was locked. I grabbed the latch and turned it every way until it opened. Once I was through the door, the creature regained its senses. In 3 strides, it was out the door reaching for me. I slid across the hood, doing my best Dukes of Hazzard impersonation, landed, and dove inside the car. The camera and tripod jammed the door open. I started the car and threw it in reverse before the door was closed. I turned, causing my door to swing open, impacting the creature and sending it sprawling to the ground. I put it in drive and stomped the gas pedal. The car slid sideways until I eased off the gas. As I sped down the dirt road, I glanced in my rearview mirror. I could see the red of my taillights illuminating 2 of the creatures chasing me. I tried to go faster, but as soon as I stepped on the gas, a turn in the road slowed me down. I slid through several turns as fast as I could while staying on the road. Trees can kill me just as effectively as those things. The dirt road emptied onto an asphalt road. I drove as fast as possible for an hour before I looked back again. The mirror showed only disappearing yellow lines. I slowed a little to the speed limit, and I didn't stop until I was home. I sat in my driveway, waiting for the creatures to catch up to me and rip me to pieces. After 20 minutes, that didn't happen. I got out of the car and went inside my house. I made sure the doors and windows were all locked. My clock said it was 6:17 in the morning. I took a shower and changed. I was extremely tired. I laid down in the bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying the last 6 hours. My mind tried to tell me I had dreamed the whole thing, but I looked at the blurry photo on the camera and wasn't so sure. After trying and failing to sleep for a few hours, I decided to call the woman whose house I had just abandoned. "Hello?" She said on the 3rd ring. "Hi, this is Tom. I was renting the house this week.
Was?
Yes. I had a little problem and had to leave.
Oh? Was it anything serious?
You could say that. I had to leave for health reasons.
I see. Will you be going back?
No, I said a bit more forcefully than intended. She was silent for a long moment.
Did anything strange happen?
The whole ordeal invaded my mind in a vicious flashback. I knew it wouldn't be like the last time. I was scarred for life. I would never look at the outdoors the same way again. No, I lied. Nothing at all.